Welcome, dear friends, to a gripping tale of lost identity, unexpected kindness, and the power of second chances. Enjoy the story. The old clock on the wall of St. Mary's Volunteer Medical Center ticked away relentlessly, its steady rhythm a stark contrast to the chaotic lives of those it served. Outside, the streets of downtown Chicago were quiet, the usual hustle and bustle of the city muted by the late hour, and the gentle patter of rain against the windows. Inside, Susan Johnson and Ethel Peabody, the night shift's dynamic duo, sat hunched over steaming mugs of tea, their weathered faces illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights. "I tell you, Ethel," Susan was saying, her voice gravelly from years of smoking, "these kids today don't know how good they have it. Back in my day—" A faint knock at the door cut her off mid-sentence. The two women exchanged glances, eyebrows raised in surprise. It wasn't unusual for the center to receive late-night visitors. That was part and parcel of running a clinic for the homeless. But something about this knock seemed different. Hesitant, almost apologetic. Ethel heaved herself up from her chair with a groan. "I'll get it," she muttered. "Lord knows you'd take all night hobbling over there." She shuffled to the door, her orthopedic shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor. As she pulled it open, a gust of cold, damp air rushed in, bringing with it the smell of rain and desperation. There, illuminated by the flickering street lamp, stood a woman. She was a sorry sight, clothes torn and muddy, dark hair matted and tangled, face smudged with dirt. But even through the grime, Ethel could see that this was no ordinary street dweller. There was something in the woman's bearing, in the way she held herself despite her bedraggled appearance, that spoke of better days. "Can I help you, dear?" Ethel asked, her voice softening instinctively. The woman looked up, her eyes wide and frightened, like a deer caught in headlights. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know where I am. I don't know who I am." Ethel felt her heart clench. In all her years at St. Mary's, she'd seen all manner of human suffering, but there was something about this woman's lost expression that tugged at her heartstrings. "Oh, you poor thing," she murmured, reaching out to gently guide the woman inside. Come in, we'll sort you out." As the door closed behind them, shutting out the cold and the rain, neither Ethel nor the mysterious woman could have imagined the chain of events that this simple act of kindness would set in motion. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the previous night's rain leaving the world outside feeling fresh and renewed. Inside St. Mary's, however, the atmosphere was one of quiet curiosity and speculation. The mysterious woman, who had tentatively given her name as Rachel, though she admitted she wasn't sure if this was correct, had been given a hot shower, clean clothes, and a warm bed for the night. Now, as the center came to life with the bustle of the day shift, Rachel stood in the small staff kitchen, looking lost and uncertain. Susan, who had taken an immediate liking to the newcomer, bustled around her like a mother hen. "Now, don't you worry about a thing, dear," she clucked, pressing a mug of coffee into Rachel's hands. "We'll get you sorted out in no time. In the meantime, how would you like to help out around here? Keeping busy is the best medicine, I always say." Rachel nodded gratefully, her hands wrapping around the warm mug. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I feel like I should be doing something useful." And so began Rachel's integration into the daily life of St. Mary's. She started with simple tasks, mopping floors, changing bedsheets, serving meals to the center's regular patients. But as the days passed, it became clear that Rachel was no ordinary helper. The first hint came when old Mr. Peterson, a grizzled Vietnam vet with a nasty leg wound, refused to let anyone change his dressing. "I don't need no help," he bellowed, swatting away the hands of the exasperated nurse. "Just leave me be." Rachel, who had been quietly mopping nearby, stepped forward. "May I try?" she asked the nurse, who threw up her hands in defeat and stepped back. With gentle hands and a soothing voice, Rachel approached Mr. Peterson. "Sir," she said softly, "I understand you're in pain, but if we don't clean this wound properly, it could get infected. Would you allow me to help you?" To everyone's amazement, Mr. Peterson's gruff exterior softened. He looked at Rachel for a long moment, then nodded grudgingly. "All right," he grumbled, "but be quick about it." Rachel's hands moved with surprising skill and efficiency as she cleaned and redressed the wound. Her movements were precise, her touch gentle but firm. When she finished, the bandage was neater and more securely fastened than anyone had managed before. "There," she said with a smile. "All done. That wasn't so bad, was it?" Mr. Peterson harumphed, but there was a glimmer of grudging respect in his eyes. "Guess not," he muttered. "You've got good hands, miss." As Rachel turned away, she caught Susan and Ethel exchanging significant looks. "That was quite impressive," Susan said carefully. "Where did you learn to do that?" Rachel's brow furrowed in confusion. I don't know," she admitted. "It just felt natural." From that day on, Rachel found herself increasingly involved in the medical side of the center's work. She seemed to have an instinctive understanding of wound care, could calculate medication dosages with ease, and had a bedside manner that put even the most difficult patients at ease. Yet for all her evident skill, Rachel's past remained a blank. She would sometimes pause in the middle of a task, a faraway look in her eyes, as if trying to grasp at some elusive memory. But the fog in her mind refused to clear, leaving her identity a mystery, to herself and to those around her. As weeks turned into a month, Rachel became an integral part of St. Mary's. The staff and patients alike had come to rely on her quiet competence and gentle demeanor. But little did they know that their world was about to be turned upside down. The day that changed everything started like any other at St. Mary's. Rachel was at the reception desk, sorting through patient files, when the front door burst open with a bang that made everyone jump. In stumbled a girl, no more than 18, her face contorted with pain and fear. She was heavily pregnant, her distended belly straining against a cheap, too-small dress. Her blonde hair was a tangled mess, her makeup smeared with tears and sweat. "Please," she gasped, clutching her stomach. "Help me! The baby, it's coming!" For a moment, the entire reception area froze in shock. St. Mary's dealt with many medical emergencies, but delivering babies was not typically one of them. The staff exchanged panicked looks, unsure of how to proceed. It was Rachel who broke the paralysis. Without a word, she was suddenly at the girl's side, her arm around her waist, supporting her weight. "It's all right," Rachel said, her voice calm and reassuring. "We're going to take care of you. What's your name?" "Emily," the girl whimpered. "Emily Carter. Oh, God, it hurts." "I know, Emily. You're doing great. Just breathe with me, okay?" Rachel looked up at the stunned staff. "We need a room now, and call an ambulance." Susan snapped into action. "Use exam room 3, she said. "I'll call 911. As Rachel guided Emily towards the exam room, her mind was racing. How did she know what to do? Where was this knowledge coming from? But there was no time to dwell on these questions. Emily needed her help. In the exam room, Rachel helped Emily onto the examination table. With deft movements that seemed to come from muscle memory rather than conscious thought, she began to prepare for the delivery. "Emily," Rachel said, her voice steady and professional, "I need to check how far along you are. Is that okay?" Emily nodded, her face pale with fear and pain. As Rachel examined her, her eyes widened. "The baby's coming fast," she muttered. "We don't have time to wait for the ambulance." Just then, Ethel poked her head into the room. "Ambulance is on its way, but there's a pile-up on the freeway. They said it might be a while." Rachel nodded grimly. "Looks like we're doing this ourselves. Ethel, I need clean towels, hot water, and any medical supplies you can find, and send in anyone with medical training." As Ethel hurried off, Rachel turned back to Emily. "All right, Emily, you're doing great. When the next contraction comes, I want you to push, okay?" Emily nodded, her face screwed up with determination. As the contraction hit, she bore down with all her might, her scream of effort echoing through the small room. That's it, Rachel encouraged. "You're doing wonderfully. I can see the head. One more big push." With a final Herculean effort, Emily pushed, and suddenly the room was filled with the piercing cry of a newborn baby. Rachel's hands moved with sure efficiency as she cleaned the baby, checked its vitals, and wrapped it in a clean towel. "Congratulations, Emily," she said, her face breaking into a wide smile. "You have a beautiful baby boy." As she placed the squalling infant on Emily's chest, Rachel felt a wave of déjà vu wash over her. This scene, this moment, it felt so familiar, like she had done this 100 times before. Emily was weeping with joy and exhaustion, cradling her son close. But as she looked up at Rachel, her eyes suddenly widened in recognition. "Dr. Zeller?" she gasped. "Is that you?" Rachel froze, her heart pounding. Dr. Zeller? Was that her name? Before she could respond, the room was suddenly full of paramedics, come too late to deliver the baby but just in time to take over postnatal care. In the commotion, Rachel slipped out of the room, her mind reeling. As she leaned against the wall in the hallway trying to make sense of what had just happened, she didn't notice Susan and Ethel watching her with a mixture of awe and suspicion. "Well," Susan murmured to Ethel, "looks like our mystery woman just got a whole lot more mysterious." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Emily and her baby boy, whom she named Stephen, were taken to the hospital for a proper checkup. Rachel, still reeling from Emily's recognition, threw herself into cleaning up the exam room, trying to distract herself from the tumult of her thoughts. It was late in the evening when Emily returned to St. Mary's, insisting that she had nowhere else to go. Rachel found herself ushering the young mother and her newborn into her own small room at the center. As Emily settled onto the bed, cradling little Stephen, she looked up at Rachel with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "I can't believe it's really you, Dr. Zeller," she said softly. "When you disappeared, I was so worried. I thought they might have done something to you." Rachel sat down heavily in the room's only chair. "Emily," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I need you to tell me everything. Who am I? How do you know me? And who are they?" Emily's eyes widened in surprise. "You really don't remember?" When Rachel shook her head, Emily took a deep breath. "Okay, I'll tell you everything." And so, as the night deepened outside and little Stephen slept peacefully in his mother's arms, Emily unfolded a tale that sounded more like a soap opera than real life. "Your name is Dr. Tanya Zeller," Emily began. "You're an obstetrician at Lakeside Hospital. About a month ago I came to see you. I was scared and desperate. You see, my parents, they're not good people. They're wealthy and influential, and they care more about their reputation than anything else. When they found out I was pregnant..." Emily's voice broke, and Rachel, or Tanya, as she now knew herself to be, reached out to squeeze her hand encouragingly. "They wanted me to get rid of the baby," Emily continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "They said it would ruin everything. Their standing in society, my future, but I couldn't do it. I love Nick. That's my boyfriend, Stephen's father. And I wanted this baby, so I ran away from home and came to you for help." Tanya listened, transfixed, as Emily recounted how she had confided in Dr. Zeller, how the doctor had been outraged by the parents' behavior and had helped Emily escape. She had given the girl money and arranged for her to stay with a friend out of town. "But my parents found out somehow," Emily said, her eyes filling with tears. "They were furious. They threatened to ruin your career, to destroy you. The last time I saw you, you told me you were going to confront them, to try and reason with them, and then you disappeared." Tanya sat back, her mind whirling. Flashes of memory were starting to break through the fog in her mind. A confrontation in a plush office, angry voices, a sense of righteous indignation, and then screeching tires, a blinding light, pain. They tried to kill me," Tanya whispered, the realization dawning on her. "They ran me over with their car." Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God," she breathed. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Zeller. This is all my fault." Tanya shook her head firmly. "No, Emily, none of this is your fault. You were in an impossible situation and you did what you had to do to protect your baby. I'm glad I was able to help you." As the full weight of her recovered identity settled over her, Tanya felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief at finally knowing who she was, anger at what had been done to her, and a fierce protectiveness towards Emily and little Stephen. "What do we do now?" Emily asked, her voice small and scared. Tanya squared her shoulders, a determined glint in her eye. "Now," she said, "we fight back. Your parents thought they could silence me, but they were wrong. We're going to make sure they face justice for what they've done." As Emily nodded, a tentative hope blooming on her face, neither of them could have predicted the storm that was about to break over their heads. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the tumultuous emotions swirling inside St. Mary's. Tanya, still reeling from the recovery of her identity, had spent a restless night pondering her next move. Emily and Stephen slept fitfully, the young mother waking at every small sound, fear etched on her face. As Tanya made her way to the center's small kitchen to make coffee, she was met by the concerned faces of Susan and Ethel. "So," Susan said, her tone careful, "Dr. Zeller, is it?" Tanya nodded, a rueful smile on her face. "Apparently so. I'm sorry for the deception, even if it was unintentional." Ethel waved away her apology. "Nonsense, dear. We're just glad you're starting to remember. But what happens now? That poor girl and her baby can't stay here forever. And if what she says about her parents is true—" She trailed off, the unspoken threat hanging in the air. Tanya nodded grimly. "You're right, we need a plan. But first, I need to make some calls. There are people who need to know I'm alive." Just as she reached for the phone, the center's front door burst open. A young man rushed in, his eyes wild with a mixture of hope and desperation. Behind him, an older man in a police uniform followed at a more measured pace. "Emily?" the young man called out. "Emily, are you here?" Tanya's eyes widened in recognition. This must be Nick, Emily's boyfriend and Stephen's father. Before she could respond, Emily emerged from Tanya's room, Stephen cradled in her arms. "Nick?" she gasped, her voice breaking. "Oh my God, Nick!" The reunion that followed was both heart-wrenching and joyous. Nick enveloped Emily and Stephen in his arms, tears streaming down his face as he met his son for the first time. The older police officer stood back, a small smile on his weathered face as he watched the young family's reunion. "I was so worried," Nick murmured into Emily's hair. "When you disappeared, I thought I'd lost you both forever." Emily pulled back slightly, her eyes shining with tears and love. "Nick, I'm so sorry. I wanted to contact you, but I was scared. My parents—" "I know," Nick said softly. "I know everything now. My dad's been helping me search for you." He gestured to the police officer. The older man stepped forward, extending his hand to Tanya. "Officer Arthur Reeves," he introduced himself. "I understand we have you to thank for keeping Emily and my grandson safe, Dr. Zeller." Tanya shook his hand, a wry smile on her face. "Well, part of me did anyway. It's a long story." As the group settled in the center's small common area, Tanya recounted the events of the past month. Her confrontation with Emily's parents, the hit-and run that had stolen her memory, and her time at St. Mary's. Arthur listened intently, his brow furrowing as he took in the details. "This is serious, Dr. Zeller," he said when she had finished. "What Emily's parents did, it's attempted murder, not to mention endangering the life of their own daughter and grandchild. We need to build a case against them." Tanya nodded in agreement. "I'm ready to testify to everything I remember, and I'm sure the hospital will have records of my interactions with Emily." Just then, Susan burst into the room, her face pale. "Turn on the TV," she said urgently. "You all need to see this." The local news was running a breaking story. The anchor's voice filled the room. In a shocking turn of events, prominent businessman Robert Carter and his wife Victoria have reported their daughter, Emily Carter, as kidnapped. They claim that Dr. Tanya Zeller, a local obstetrician who has been missing for the past month, is responsible for the abduction. The Carters are offering a substantial reward for any information leading to their daughter's safe return. The room fell silent as the implications of this new development sank in. Emily's face had drained of color, while Nick held her and Stephen protectively. Arthur's expression had hardened into one of grim determination. "Well," Tanya said, breaking the tense silence, "it looks like the Carters have made their move. Now it's our turn." Arthur nodded, already pulling out his phone. "I'm calling this in. We need to get ahead of this story. Dr. Zeller, are you ready to go public with your side of events?" Tanya took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "Absolutely. It's time the truth came out." As Arthur made his calls and the others huddled together, discussing their next steps, None of them noticed the sleek black car that had pulled up outside the center. Inside sat Robert and Victoria Carter, their faces masks of cold determination. "There," Robert said, pointing to the center's sign. "That must be where they're hiding. Are you ready, Victoria?" His wife nodded, her perfectly manicured hand clutching her designer handbag. "Let's get our daughter back," she said, her voice steely. As the Carters exited their car and strode towards St. Mary's, the stage was set for a confrontation that would change all their lives forever. The atmosphere inside St. Mary's was electric with tension. Tanya, Emily, Nick, and Arthur were deep in discussion, formulating their plan to counter the Carters' false kidnapping claim, when the center's front door flew open with a bang. Robert and Victoria Carter swept in like a force of nature, their expensive clothes and haughty demeanor a stark contrast to the humble surroundings of the volunteer center. Robert's eyes scanned the room, locking onto Emily with a mixture of anger and triumph. "Emily!" he barked. "Thank God we found you. Come, we're taking you home right now." Emily shrank back, clutching Stephen closer to her chest. Nick stepped protectively in front of them, his jaw set in defiance. "She's not going anywhere with you," he said, his voice low and firm. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. Her daughter with a baby, the unknown young man, and then... Her gaze landed on Tanya, and her face contorted with shock and fury. "You!" she hissed. "How dare you show your face here after what you've done?" Tanya stood her ground, meeting Victoria's glare with steady determination. "I think you'll find, Mrs. Carter, that I'm not the one who's done anything wrong here." Robert, seeming to finally register Tanya's presence, lunged forward with a roar of rage. "You meddling bitch! I'll finish what I started!" What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Robert's hands reached for Tanya's throat, his face purple with fury. Arthur moved to intervene, but he was too far away. And then, just as Robert's fingers were about to close around Tanya's neck, a resounding crack echoed through the room. Victoria Carter stood there, her designer handbag hanging from her hand, a look of shock on her face. Robert crumpled to the ground, clutching his head where the heavy bag had struck him. "That's enough, Robert," Victoria said, her voice shaking. I can't do this anymore." The room fell into stunned silence. Arthur quickly moved to restrain Robert, who was groaning on the floor. Tanya, rubbing her neck, looked at Victoria with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Mrs. Carter?" she said carefully. "I think it's time we all had a long talk." Over the next hour, as Robert sat sullenly under Arthur's watchful eye, the truth came pouring out. Victoria, her carefully maintained facade crumbling, revealed the years of emotional abuse she had endured at Robert's hands. How he had manipulated and controlled both her and Emily, all in the name of maintaining their perfect public image. "When Emily got pregnant," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Robert was furious. He said it would ruin everything we had worked for. He ordered me to convince Emily to get rid of the baby. But I couldn't do it. I helped her escape instead," Emily gasped, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, I had no idea." Victoria turned to her daughter, years of unshed tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I should have been stronger. I should have protected you better." As mother and daughter embraced, Robert's face twisted with rage. "You traitor!" he spat at Victoria. "After everything I've done for this family." Arthur tightened his grip on Robert's arm. "That's enough out of you. Robert Carter, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and a whole host of other charges we'll sort out down at the station." As Arthur led a protesting Robert out of the center, Tanya turned to Victoria. "Mrs. Carter, your testimony will be crucial in building a case against your husband. Are you willing to go on record with everything you've told us?" Victoria straightened her shoulders, a newfound strength in her bearing. "Yes," she said firmly. "It's time I stood up for my daughter, and for myself." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Statements were taken, arrangements were made for Emily, Nick, and Stephen to stay in a safe house, and plans were set in motion for a press conference to set the record straight. As the day drew to a close, Tanya found herself standing outside St. Mary's, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. She felt a presence beside her and turned to see Arthur joining her. "Quite a day," he said, his voice gruff but kind. Tanya nodded, a wry smile on her face. "Quite a month, really." They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Arthur spoke again. "You know, Dr. Zeller, what you did for Emily, for all of them really, it's pretty remarkable." Tanya shrugged, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I just did what any decent person would do." Arthur turned to face her, his expression serious. "Not everyone would have put themselves on the line like that. You're a special kind of person, Tanya." The use of her first name sent a small thrill through Tanya. She looked up at Arthur, really seeing him for the first time, the kindness in his eyes, the strength in his bearing, the gentle set of his mouth. "Thank you, Arthur," she said softly. "That means a lot coming from you." As they stood there, the last rays of sunlight painting the world in a golden glow, Tanya felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead would not be easy. There were still legal battles to fight, wounds to heal, and a career to rebuild. But for the first time since she had woken up with no memory of who she was, Tanya felt truly, completely herself. And as Arthur's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining almost of their own accord, Tanya realized that sometimes losing everything could be the first step towards finding something even better. 6 months later, the steps of the county courthouse were crowded with reporters and curious onlookers. The trial of Robert Carter had captured the public's imagination, a sordid tale of wealth, power, and the length some would go to protect their reputation. Tanya stood at the top of the steps, Emily and Nick on one side of her, Victoria on the other. Stephen, now a chubby, happy 6-month-old, gurgled contentedly in his mother's arms. "The jury has reached a verdict," Tanya announced to the assembled crowd. "Robert Carter has been found guilty on all charges. He will be facing a significant prison sentence." A cheer went up from the crowd. Emily buried her face in Nick's shoulder, overcome with emotion. Victoria stood tall, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. As the press conference wound down and the crowd began to disperse, Arthur made his way up the steps to join them. "You did good up there," he said to Tanya, a proud smile on his face. Tanya laughed, linking her arm through his. "We all did good. It was a team effort." And it had been. Over the past months, they had all worked tirelessly to bring Robert to justice. Victoria had been brave in her testimony, laying bare years of abuse and manipulation. Emily and Nick had stood strong in the face of intense public scrutiny. And Tanya, well, Tanya had rediscovered not just her identity, but her purpose. She had returned to her medical practice, but with a new focus. Inspired by her time at St. Mary's, she had started a program to provide free prenatal care to homeless and at-risk women. The program, run in partnership with the Volunteer Center, was already making a difference in the community. As for her personal life, Tanya glanced up at Arthur, warmth blooming in her chest at his gentle smile. Their relationship had grown slowly, naturally, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values. He had been her rock through the tumultuous months of the trial, and she couldn't imagine facing the future without him by her side. "So," Arthur said, as they began to descend the courthouse steps, "what's next?" Tanya thought for a moment. "Well, I've got a birthing class to teach this evening. Then tomorrow, I'm meeting with the board about expanding the prenatal program. And this weekend—" She trailed off, a mischievous glint in her eye. Arthur raised an eyebrow. "This weekend?" "This weekend," Tanya said, her voice soft but sure. "I thought maybe we could start looking at houses. You know, something with a bit more space. Maybe a yard?" Arthur's steps faltered for a moment as the implication of her words sank in. Then a wide, beaming smile spread across his face. "I think that sounds like a perfect plan," he said, pulling her close and planting a kiss on her forehead. As they reached the bottom of the steps, Emily called out to them, "Hey, are you two coming to Stephen's half-birthday party this weekend? Mom's insisting on making it a big thing." Victoria laughed, the sound light and carefree in a way it had never been before. "It's not every day my grandson turns 6 months old. We have a lot of lost time to make up for." Tanya and Arthur exchanged a fond look. "We wouldn't miss it for the world," Tanya assured them. As the group made their way down the street, chatting and laughing, Tanya felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. 6 months ago, she had been lost, her identity and her purpose stripped away. Now she was surrounded by people she loved, doing work that mattered, and looking forward to a future brighter than she could have imagined.